Are you guys sick of talking about Jordan Peele yet? Because I'm not really, so why not do this? This was actually suggested to me by Owen to do this when I hadn't really planned on it, but I figured, I did a couple of videos on Get Out, I did a couple of videos on Us, why not? So, as far as this goes, and, I'm like, the original TV show was one of my favorite shows. I only saw a few episodes of like that updated '80s version, and then I didn't see any of the Forrest Whitaker one. Um, but yeah, I'm always watching the marathons of the original show all the time. The box sets, all that good stuff. So, and obviously I just love my anthology shit in general. So, yeah, I mean, why not tackle this? So, um, as far as Peele's actual involvement, I'm going to assume that the advertising is probably overstating that more than some people might realize, which may not surprise anybody either. But obviously he is doing the Serling approach where he's the narrator to the camera and he introduces the stories, and the way it sort of transitions to him as it's doing its sort of setting up the story. Which is great. He's like definitely got the voice for it, and we know that with the style of stuff he likes to make, whether it be something like Get Out or Us or some of the weirder Key and Peele sketches, it kind of makes perfect sense that another reboot of this show would fall into his lap of all people. The one thing about his sort of absence from this is not necessarily his physical absence, but the fact that when you see, Serling as the narrator and stuff like that, and, his created by credit and all that, he wrote, like, a lot of the really good episodes himself also. And so you kind of expect maybe people have a hand in it, sort of like the way, when you see a big director get a show off the ground, they usually direct the first episode, like with Scorsese and Boardwalk Empire, or Fincher and House of Cards, or whatever. But that's but no, the only thing he does here is he's got that executive producer credit, and he's the narrator. Some of the credits here you can see are like inspired by him. Like the writer of the comedian episode is Alex Rubens, who was a writer on Key and Peele and Keanu. So yeah, I'm wondering if that will come into play a little more. It'd be nice to see more of like his touch. I mean, you can still kind of see like his influence in it when you watch it. Like it sort of comes off as his sort of directing style sometimes, and you can see his fingerprints on it. But you can also kind of tell that he's not as involved as he probably should be if we want as high a quality as we can get, at least with these stories today. So I figure we can go into. I'm actually not sure because they released these two episodes together, but I keep hearing both on which one is actually the first episode. But I think I want to start with the comedian, what seems to widely be considered the weakest of the two. Where I mentioned Alex Rubens is our writer, we also have the director is the guy that did a couple of episodes of Black Mirror, which obviously Black Mirror is more or less another version of the Twilight Zone, just with like feature-length episodes. So that pretty much makes sense. And this particular story does have, like, I mean, obviously when you get to Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, that's clearly influenced by the recurring segment we've gotten, but this one, while not, I don't think officially inspired by anything, has had obvious comparisons thrown out. Like, the second you hear the concept, it's like, there was the episode of the '80s version, I think, The Card, and then there was the episode of Night Gallery, which is another Rod Serling anthology show that Spielberg directed, I think. So that particular episode seems similar to, or this one seems similar to, where we have Kumail Nanjiani as a comedian that is basically cursed by Tracy Morgan. To the point that when he starts bombing because he's doing political stuff in his comedy, he decides to start talking about the people in his real life, and they disappear from existence when he does that. So obviously one of the things that was recurring in a lot of the older episodes of the show was the different themes. Also, a lot of social themes, which once again really fits into what Peele does. So it still all kind of comes together. But here, I it is a bit more like there were a lot of moments in the original TV show where they just pretty much outright explained what it was, and like what the connection was, or what the social connection was, or what exactly it was trying to say. Where these are clear that they're going to try to be a bit more ambiguous, depending on exactly how far something has to go for a certain person to decide whether or not they're saying too much, or not enough, or just enough, or whatever. But there's some open to interpretation stuff, particularly with this one, where it's obvious when it starts. Well, before we get into that, as far as the style goes, it is really well done, because when you think about the original show, there was just something about the feel of it that is like so identifiable, and just really puts you in that just really weird place they wanted to put you in. And this one does that. Like, the way it's shot, everything just feels like really weird and mysterious, even like the mundane before anything is really taken off. Because this particular segment takes its time. It's almost an hour long, which really concerned me when I saw that, because I was like, are all the episodes going to be an hour? Because I feel like it might be dragged out a little bit. No, the Nightmare at 30,000 Feet is only 37 minutes, so I guess they're going to fluctuate depending on the story, but this one didn't need to be as long as it is, but it's clear that they wanted to... They were taking advantage of a lot of stuff. Like, we've got the R-rated approach that they're taking now, and it's also kind of taking advantage of, like, I guess because it's on a streaming service, they're pretty much open to being able to just make it whatever length they want, instead of saying this is the particular time frame for each one. And I could see that work, but I could also see people taking advantage of that in the wrong way too. It's sort of like this. But the thing here is that when I was talking about that weird sort of feeling that you get, not just the way it's shot, but also when we're watching him perform at the beginning, before it really takes off, because talking about that length, it's like over 10 minutes in before we get the Peele introduction. Like, this was the first episode I watched, assuming it was the first episode. So I was like, so is the first episode just not doing an intro? And then, like, 11 minutes later, it's like, oh, there he is. So they really took their time setting it up. But yeah, so the opening is we see him doing this same routine, and the thing that really sets up that weird thing was the thing that makes the people disappear, obviously, in his life when he talks about them in his act, is only if the crowd laughs. And it's sort of like this weird mob laughing. Like, you don't have, like, one scattered laugh, or, whatever, or, like, in various places or whatever. It's all the audience all at once, and it's big, to show, I guess, that transition is happening. But the thing here is that I was confused at first, because since it takes so much time letting you realize that's what the setup is their laughing seems to be it happening. I was like, when the first time he like went after somebody and the crowd lost it, his dog, it was like, that's weird that this is his career taking off, because it wasn't funny, which I found odd. It was just him ranting, which of course could be saying like a whole other thing. But at first I was concerned, because I thought it was just like bad writing. Because it was like, oh, so this is what the writer thinks would kill in a comedy club, apparently. But no, that's what the setup is, and I'm sure there's underlying things to be said about that, which once again we'll get into in a second. But also, I guess there is the whole thing about... The main thing seems to be the whole trading your personal life for like fame and success sort of thing, particularly in the comedy world, especially when you have to put such personal stories out there at the expense of them for the laughs from these strangers. And I can see where that is, but that's the thing, is if there is, like, more, it sort of feels like you're kind of reaching for it. And it's like, is it really just kind of that bare bones and what it's trying to say, or is it, really layered? Like the kind of stuff that Peele does. So and it is carried by Kumail Nanjiani's performance for sure, and the performance of his girlfriend also. The only trouble here is I do think, even though I've realized the explanation for the whole comedy thing, I still think there's a lot of cases where the writing was really weak. In this one particularly, like the scene where he's arguing with his girlfriend, just everything feels so... And when his girlfriend shows up at the end, it just all kind of feels choppily put together, especially when they've taken almost an hour to stretch it out as much as they have, where you think we'd have all that breathing room and that things would like slowly come together. But when they finally do come together, it feels incredibly rushed. Because we were kind of just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again in the middle there. And so that's, like, and that's the thing, too, is that's when I kind of started trying to dissect what else you could find in regards to the meaning of all this, the underlying meaning, and not just it's weird, you know, shit that's happening, mysterious shit. So there's, like, I was starting to wonder if it was something like, because he's doing a bit on the Second Amendment. Like, that's the whole setup. He does the Second Amendment bit, it fails, then he does the shitting on somebody thing and making them disappear when they laugh. My first thought was, is it this take on the fact that so much humor nowadays, especially in, like, the late night area, is, like, politically themed? And I know that's running its course for a lot of people, and it's like, if it was trying to say something like political humor's getting too safe, so, like, when he just does the political humor and nobody laughs, there's no danger to what happens to him in his personal life. But then the second he starts to go to something else, particularly his personal life, is when he finds himself in danger of fucking up everything that he's got. So I wondered if maybe there was something like that, or maybe it was something like, from like a stand-up comedian's perspective, where it's like how there are comedians that don't get very far because they kind of rely on just the same material, and there's that fear of like changing the routine. So it's like, when he does the same material over and over again, and he does it over and over again. We hear his Second Amendment routine 3 times before the beginning credits are over. And obviously that bit always fails, but every time he changes his routine, he's not technically changing his routine because it's just shitting on somebody, but it's always a different person every time, so he's technically changing the routine, and that's where he's like taking the risk. Maybe? I don't know. But that's kind of the vibe I was getting and the different directions I was sort of taking it, because and that's kind of what you have to do, because kind of on the surface level there's just not a whole lot there once he figures it out. And he figures it out long after we do. And then just the way he uses it over and over again, it's like, we only really needed this to a certain extent to get it, and then it would have been great. Because the great thing about the original show was that you kind of, a lot of the time, if the episode was really good, you were never quite sure what that other term was. And there always was one at some point, where it's like, oh, I see where this is going, and just when it gets to that point where you think, yep, this is what I was expecting, there's like one more turn, and you're like, oh shit. That's very much missing here. It's like, you kind of know exactly how this is going to end. You figure it out really early, and you're just kind of waiting for, okay, now that we've established this is what he does, and this is what he's doing, and this is the, you know, setup, where's the turning point? But there's not a turning point. It's that. And it just goes on and on and on until the ending we're expecting comes. And they squeeze in that Shining reference at the last minute. So, so yeah, so I do see, you know, that there is definitely appeal in this one. I was talking about the performances. Kumail Nanjiani especially. I especially like towards the end there in the last segment when he basically goes full Peter Finch and Network, just going off on everybody. And you know who else is really good here is Tracy Morgan. He only has like 2 or 3 scenes, but he plays them totally straight, and it's amazing to me, especially when you hear the stories about on 30 Rock when he like never remembered his lines, and they like had to constantly be fed to him, and it's like, it's really hard to believe that that guy gives this performance. So that's really cool, because I've kind of, you know, shit on him for some of his comedies in the past, but when he's just playing it totally straight, it's crazy what he can do, and he shows that in his little bit here, so I really like seeing that. So, yeah, so it was fine, but I mean, it's like, once again, if we're saying this is the first episode, it is pretty underwhelming when it doesn't really take any of those extra turns, and it's the ending that we're all expecting it to be. So yeah, but it is a decent enough setup, and like I said, the way it's shot and the way it feels is eerie enough to feel like it's, in that Twilight Zone world and all that stuff. So yeah, and I was just kind of open to liking it anyway, because it's like, it's another Twilight Zone, I'll take it. So, but yeah, so I probably was never going to be like overly critical unless it was like absolute dog shit, which it's certainly not, but underwhelming, I would say, at least for the comedian. As far as Nightmare at 30,000 Feet goes, obviously the original title is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which I'm going to assume, at least I took it as the slight change in title by one number, was to basically show that this isn't exactly the same story. It's like the same setup on the surface, but at the same time, totally different. Because before we had, this was actually, and that's interesting, because I was actually kind of battling with myself, because I was a little put off at first. And this is probably really through no fault of the show, this is probably on me, but the fact that I didn't realize they had changed what this was, so throughout the whole episode, I was still kind of waiting for the gremlin. So it kind of felt a bit directionless to me because of that. But then, as I thought about it, now knowing how the episode actually plays out, it was like, okay, I should probably watch this episode again now that I know what's going on. And now I know what they're doing, and that it's not that exact the episode it used to be. And the reason that's a good is because going into this, when my first thought was, well, this is a little excessive, isn't it? Because you did this episode already in the original show with Shatner, and then you remade that episode with John Lithgow for the movie, and now you're going to do it again. So, and we've already had Richard Donner directed the original episode, and of course the pilot's name in this is Donner, and then George Miller did the segment in the movie. So it's like, with those two performances that Shatner and Lithgow gave from those two directors whose names we definitely know and made an impact, what else can you do with this? And with Adam Scott, no less. I know I've said many times in the past that I'm not crazy about Adam Scott, so needless to say, it's like, pre-Star Trek Shatner, John Lithgow. Adam Scott sticks out a little bit and didn't give me a whole lot of confidence. But he did kind of win me over here, especially in like the opening scenes before he's even on the plane. Because as somebody who is so terrified of flying, I have never done it and probably won't. The way Adam Scott feels and the way it sort of sets everything up, it gave me the feeling of this is probably what I'd feel like if I ever got on a plane. Where everything feels like, I mean, obviously it's storming, but still everything just feels really ominous and dark and unsettling and just off. Everything feels off and like it's not the way it's supposed to be. And so going into that, and obviously they set up that, I'm guessing they're setting up a universe thing here. I don't know. They're the magazines with Kumail Nanjiani in the airport in this segment, which apparently came before the events of the comedian. So, yeah, it reminded me of in Planet Terror when you hear the Memoriam to Jungle Julia from Death Proof. So, yeah, but anyway, as far as those opening scenes go, I thought that was really established, like, the fear and the dread going into what the actual segment is. And then, of course, we're going to do the updated thing, and instead of an evil gremlin tearing at the wing, it's an evil podcast that can predict the future. And that sounds really fucking stupid when you say it, but it actually kind of works for the most part. Especially the voice on the podcast just really kind of has that, like, it's so normal, it's, like, unsettling. Almost as unsettling as a train whistle going off as I said that. So, and he's surrounded by all these different people. He's being watched by a passenger in the middle. Chris Diamantopoulos keeps randomly popping up and just acting off. And he's a character that's, like, frustratingly enigmatic, which I really like, because it kind of, like, every time he appears and just talks to Adam Scott, It's like, you know he's important, but you don't know why, and he's just such an off-putting nature. It's like, it really gives you the feeling of how Adam Scott must feel talking to him and continuously being approached by him. So I did really like that. Now, the thing about this, though, is that this story and the comedian both have something in them that nitpicky people might, like, it might bring down. There's, like, one question you can continuously ask through both these stories that kind of makes them crumble. So, like, with the comedian, you probably have a lot of people asking, why doesn't he talk shit on Tracy Morgan and make Tracy Morgan disappear? Then the whole thing never happened. And similarly in this, I kept asking myself, why doesn't he just listen to the whole podcast before he reacts? And I know there's, like, a time issue here, because they keep mentioning the times that all this shit was going down. But it just, like, it was so weirdly, like, exact, where it's like, oh, the story calls for this. It was literally like watching live when you criticize a movie and you say, like, this thing only happens because the script says. It's like we're actually watching, like, Adam Scott does something only because the podcast says. And it's like he doesn't try to, like, at the same time, he keeps trying to break through from what the podcast is doing, but then just keeps doing what it's saying. And that could probably be frustrating for viewers, probably, but once again, that's the story. You just kind of have to go with it. And this one probably isn't as clear as the comedian is in regards to the, you know, what you could take underlying or whatever. There's obviously some sort of surveillance angle going on here where you've got the cameras that, you know, watch the pilots at all times, and then you got the fact that we learn, like, halfway through the podcast that Adam Scott is likely being recorded in some way, because they pick up audio that he's been saying throughout this, and somehow everything on the plane is, like, somehow this information got to whoever was doing this podcast or whatever. So, yeah, but every now and then, though, there is something where it's like, alright, that's a little much, like the callbacks, like there's the dummy from one of the old episodes in Kumail Nanjiani's, like, dressing room in The Comedian, and it's just there in the background, no attention's drawn to it, nothing. And then it's like, okay, the pilot's name is Donner. It's like, okay, that's a little blatant, but okay. And then they actually resort to the plush gremlin laying on the beach at the end, and that was where it was like. And it's like you're gonna make millions of people feel extra special, thinking they're the only person that knows what that is. Great. Or it's gonna make people say, hey, that's like that old thing I like, also that's also this thing, which means this thing is equal to that thing. It doesn't really capture any of those things. It's just there as a blatant, hey, you know, the old show existed too. Which you have to be really careful with, because you're just going to make people want to watch the old show. So, yes, after watching these two, it's like, yeah, it's fine, but it really just makes you want to bust that box set back out. So I can't wait for the 4th of July or New Year's or anything. I'm just going to... So, but yeah, I did like the way they, you know, tried to do this one a bit differently, especially since it's the most, like, you know, talked about and parodied and redone episode of the show. So... But yeah, it's still, though, it does feel like there's something missing from this one, and I can't quite put my finger on it, and I don't know if it's just, like, that it's basically the same as The Comedian, in the sense that because it's, you know, predicting the future and all that, the podcast, it seems to be, it's like, we know where it's headed, so where's the turn? Now, there is a little turn in this in regards to Christy Gonzalez's character, but it's like, then what? I mean, like, what's the reveal exactly? The guy that said through the whole thing that he was a pilot ends up at the front of the plane. Not particularly surprising. I mean, I guess the context of it could potentially be a little surprising, but not in that holy shit way that the Twilight Zone, that you associate with the Twilight Zone when in its story terms, where it was like, the Twilight Zone was so good at that, you'd almost, like, you could tell somebody that plot twists began with the Twilight Zone, and some of them would probably believe you. They were that good. So, and let's not forget that Rod Serling also wrote or adapted or whatever the original Planet of the Apes, one of the bigger twists in movie history. So yeah, so a lot is still to be desired, but we're also only 2 episodes in. So I am totally willing to see what else is done here, and I was saying at the beginning, you know, it needs more Peele influence. I'm not necessarily saying that whoever they get to direct these episodes should just do Peele, because that would be... Number one, there wouldn't be too much variety, and secondly, you know, you want to see other people's visions, but you also kind of want to... There's a certain feel that you do kind of hope for and anticipate here that hopefully they can find more often as they go on, but I guess we'll have to see. So I think that's all I have to say about these in the meantime, but we'll see what the next episode has to say, which I think there are 10. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. So now we're going to, it's going to be like a shitload of verses and then a somewhat packed Friday review video. That's the plan anyway. So, and then we'll get back to this when the next episode is out. So until all of that stuff, I think that's it for this.